Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. It's been a while since we met last. Here for the Committee of the Whole meeting. City of Lacombe, it's Monday, August the 14th and 5:31. I'll call the meeting to order. You've had an opportunity to look at the rather brief agenda. Any issues with that? J.O. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I was hoping you would entertain the addition of one in-camera land item.
Very good. Anyone else? If I could have a motion accordingly, please. One of the few we can make this evening. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I move that we adopt the agenda as amended.
Thank you very much. And I believe that is on your units. Please go ahead and vote. Sure, that'll be a whole host of green circle or rectangles rather. Thank you. That is unanimously in favor. And our first up this evening, we have a presentation by two individuals from Hobson Shell Advisory Group of the CIBC Wood Gundy group. Chart and James, thank you both for attending. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening to give you an economic update. For those of you who don't know us, we manage the long-term investment reserves for the City of Lacombe. So we hope that this will kind of add some value to your decision-making process over the next couple of months. It's been a ton of change in the world over the past year since we last saw you. Luckily, a lot of our forecasts did come true. But it has had some pretty significant ramifications for how we do things going forward. So I want to start by looking back. What has happened in the world in the last year? Well, more than 40 central banks increased interest rates by at least 0.75% at once since the start of 2022. To put it in context, a normal rate hike is 0.25%. So this is not a Canada problem. It's not a US problem. It is a global problem. And so we are seeing the most dramatic rise in yields on any year on record. So this impacts your investment returns. This impacts your borrowing costs. We've seen the Bank of Canada raise interest rates from 0.25 all the way to 5% today, which has had a dramatic surge in bond yields, which again will impact your lending rates. The good news on this story is that your investment revenues should increase materially over the next couple of years. It's not going to happen instantly, but as we can reinvest these maturities and cash flows at higher interest rates, we should see that bottom line investment revenue number jump pretty materially. To put it in context, even just a year ago, we were patting ourselves on the back to get 3% on a bond. Now we can get 6 to 9% on a fully guaranteed bank issued bond. So that's just how dramatically the world has changed on the investment and lending side. Now, why were the central bankers doing this? It's no surprise to anyone in the room. It was to fight inflation that won't go away. This chart here just shows you basically the peak of inflation rates around the 8% mark. So 4 times what the central bank would normally target at that 2% range. But the good news is we are starting to see inflation come down, back down to earth, which is obviously a good news story. Char and I work with 83 municipalities across the country, mostly in Alberta. This has had a dramatic impact on budgets, capital projects coming in materially higher than what was expected. The problem here is that even though inflation is coming down, inflation is just a rate of change. So the bill has already been incurred. We've seen that 8% inflation. Now yes, the rate's coming down, but we're still seeing prices moving higher. So where do we see things moving forward? Sorry, this chart didn't show up like it should, but essentially, this shows you on the left there the Canadian excess savings in checking accounts. So what happened during COVID was people couldn't travel, they couldn't go out, they couldn't spend money like we normally could. So people basically saved that money, except for me because I like to spend. But what we have seen lately is that the rate of personal savings has started to come down materially. So the impact of these rate hikes is starting to really ripple through the economy. Chart's going to get into kind of our growth outlook later. But then on the right there, it shows you the credit balances. So, you know, much like our savings, it's sort of the inverse. People didn't draw down on their credit cards during the pandemic, but the trend we're seeing is for those spending patterns to come back up to that pre-COVID trend. Now, the problem with whenever you raise interest rates is there's a delay between the time you raise rates and when the pain's actually felt by consumers. This shows you the full hit from higher debt servicing costs has yet to be seen. So there's a lag effect to these rate hikes, and this just shows you basically mortgages that will be subject to renewal over the next couple of years. And as you can see, about 60% of mortgages in Canada by the end of the year will be subject to higher interest rates. So people with variable rate mortgages, obviously, we're already feeling the hit from those higher payments. But those mortgages will start to come up for renewal. Instead of renewing at 2%, you're renewing at 5 or 6%. So these rate hikes will start to bring inflation down. They will start to slow down the rate of growth that we're going to see globally. And just on that point, the effectiveness of monetary policy is about as high as it's ever been. On the left there, you can see sort of the cumulative hike in policy rate during the 1987 to 1990s rate hiking cycle. Many of us, or many of you can remember, hearing stories about those crazy 18% interest rate mortgages. So where are we now compared to there? Yes, we haven't raised rates as much as we did back in the late 80s, but if you adjust that for the amount of debt that Canadians hold, it's actually more impactful than it was back in the late 80s. So there is a serious hit that these rate hikes are having on Canadian consumers. On the right there, it just shows you the negative impact of a 1% increase in effective interest rate. That's been rising basically consistently for the last couple of decades. And basically it shows you that for every 1% you hike interest rates, Canadian consumer spending drops by 2%. So we've hiked interest rates by almost 5%. That's an almost 10% hit to Canadian consumer spending. So why does this matter? Well, it's 70% of GDP in Canada. So just to illustrate that point there. So Canadian inflation is easing more than others. So this just shows you kind of how we stack up against our peers. The red line there being Canada. Then we've got the US, the UK, and the Eurozone. The UK has had a very tough time trying to contain inflation. So their rate's actually still rising. But Canadian consumers are far less overheated than our peers to the south. So this shows you that the US economy is much more overheated than we are in Canada. There was a lot more fiscal stimulus doled out in the US than there was in Canada. This shows you the gray line is the US, the change between pre-COVID and now spending patterns. So you can see how much greater it is in the US for goods spending, services spending, things like that. This will have implications for the budget here in Lacombe. Housing affordability is at its worst level since 1985. This graph here this is based on US data because there's just more data out there, but this applies to Canada and Alberta as a whole as well. We've seen 40,000 people move to Alberta in the last 3 months from Ontario and BC. So if you have a very expensive house in BC, you can sell it, move here to Lacombe, buy the same house, and unlock a huge percentage of your home equity and your home wealth. But this is shutting out the younger home buyers from the market. Obviously, higher interest rates don't help that, but it's a positive for Alberta real estate. Yes, if you live in Vancouver and Toronto, their markets have been very overheated, so you might be a bit concerned about these rising interest rates. But here in Alberta, we are seeing a ton of immigration just within Canada to Alberta, just simply because it's a lower cost of living.
Perfect. So basically, things are very expensive. Rates are very, very, very high. The big question that we get asked is, where are we going to go from here? I think the one thing that we need to educate Canadians on average a lot better at is, yes, rates are going to come down. The question becomes, where are they going to come back down to? Short answer, it's not going to be 2020 free interest rate levels. Like that's just, those days are gone. Where we can kind of see that forecast from a rate perspective, I'll get into a little bit later here, is basically from a rate forecast perspective, we see the Bank of Canada starting to cut rates aggressively over the next year or even 2 years. However, it's going to be back to a more normalized, sustainable level of debt. It's not going to go even sub 2. We're looking around a leveling off of 3.5, which is where we'll get, which is more in line with that neutral policy. You don't want severe swings in interest rates, no different than in Alberta. We don't want severe, like we don't want $100 oil and $20 oil tomorrow. We don't want this boom bust. We want a sustainable level that you can then forecast growth off of. So the new midpoint for where we see interest rates going forward is going to be lower. And in line with that, if you take a look at basically where the Bank of Canada is aiming for their target level of demand, in line with keeping rates higher, their target level of demand going forward is lower as well. So the monetary policy report in January 2020 is the light gray line, the solid black line in April of 2023, and the last monetary policy report is the black line. The dotted line was a pre-COVID trend. So you can kind of see that where the Bank of Canada is aiming for their level of demand going out of COVID is materially lower than where it was in the pre-COVID trend. So overall, we see demand, just GDP in general, going down in line with the Bank of Canada, in line with keeping rates higher, but lower than where they are today. Now, what does those rates look like exactly? I'll anchor you to the top line there, the overnight target rate. As James mentioned, we're at 5% today. We think there's another point hike in where the Bank of Canada is going to raise rates to. And then if you look at moving forward a year to the end of next year, the Bank of Canada then cuts rates aggressively back down to 3.5%. Where this that's from an overnight rate perspective. The more important line item is the 10-year government bond number. It starts at 3.46 as of today. You can see where it ends up to in 2.75%. These are very, very important for two perspectives. One is if you're looking at what mortgage rates and things like that are going to do. Those two lines are very easy to see. You can also see that we're getting nowhere near pre-COVID level interest rate levels. We're going to go back to, like we said, a higher level of cost of living, but into a more normalized rate. And the other piece is just making sure that cash flow is optimized as best as we can. We work with administration a lot because cash flow is fully optimized, so we're very happy with that. But from an overall cost of living perspective, cost of debt perspective, it's going to come back down, but not that far that it's debt is going to be dirt cheap level. So when we look at borrowing costs for consumers, you're looking at like 4.5%, 5%. Like that's where your normalization ends up coming back down to. Now, a lot of data on this chart. A couple of things that I'll anchor to you too is, as an eternal optimist, I always find ways to find positives in my charts. Alberta is going to be leading the pack in 2023 and 2024 in terms of GDP growth. I say leading the pack, but again, when your growth forecast is 1.5%, 0.8%, it's not hard to lead the pack. Obviously, ours is going to be driven significantly by commodities and the housing boom that James was just talking about, where we have net immigration and migration coming to Alberta, just from an affordability standpoint. Unemployment rate, basically on par with the national average. The biggest takeaway from this chart here is on the far right-hand side, the CPI index, because so that's your inflation forecast. Alberta, 3.1% this year. The overall forecast for the year, 3.7%. Those numbers are very, very important to anchor to, because if you were to take a look at basically what the news is printing out right now, you've seen CPI prints of, was it 2.8%? Now we're just over 3% right now. If you look at the year over year change of where inflation is, if you're looking at it as at a certain point in time, those are very dangerous numbers to look at, because last month when we saw it, sub 3%, the market freaked out and was really happy. A lot of fake data gets baked into that. That was extrapolated because it was over exaggerated, because basically natural gas prices year over year, as at those 2 points of time, made inflation look very, very low. And then a month later, inflation is going to be, watching the next month print of CPI, you're going to see the exact opposite, because nat gas is going to spike. So what that means for you guys, how to use this chart, is when you guys when you enter into your budget sessions, things like that, I would caution away from looking at what the news is looking at from a year over year inflation data number. You want to look at the entire average for the entire year, because that's where you're getting multiple data points to kind of set your guys' averages for that perspective. Crude oil is a very good indicator for us in Alberta for obvious reasons, and I can touch base on nat gas after as well. We're just trading about over $80 today. Very happy with $80. 70 to 80 is where, as a from a GDP perspective, we like to see 70 to $80. Capital expenditure programs start to come back when it's a sustainable 70 to $80. The only key things that the market are worried about from a downtrend perspective are China's growth forecast numbers have come in very, very low. And so the market is panicking a little bit. Obviously, when China, the large manufacturer out there, starts decreasing its growth forecast, it's going to draw less on commodities, which is putting downward pressure on commodities. On the complete flip side, you have significant geopolitical risks still baked into the market by Russia and Ukraine, where our commodities should fare fairly well in comparison. So basically, you're having a push and pull, but the equilibrium still sits around that $70 to $80 mark. Nat gas sitting at about $2.80 right now. That one's significantly more cyclical and seasonal towards micro trends. Obviously, the seasonality of nat gas right now is spiking very high. Again, going back into inflation is one to watch. But overall, from a commodities perspective, this is why GDP growth in Alberta is going to lead this year and next year. It's very sustainable. Very happy with the prices that we're seeing right now in terms of commodities. From the labor perspective, I haven't said this in quite some time, but the public sector is outpacing the private sector in terms of labor growth right now. And this is the Canada-wide average. Why that is a lot of these businesses just spend a significant amount of time getting really efficient on their balance sheets over the better part of a decade in terms of this, basically in terms of the economic cycle we're in. And then COVID happened, and then we had this big boom, but everybody's very reluctant to hire because they just finished getting very, very efficient. Versus on the public sector, we had a significant amount of demand. So from the labor perspective, the public sector significantly outpacing the private sector. And that's going to be the trend going forward as well until we see more of a normalization and companies start to put more of that capital back towards their capital expenditure programs. And then the population and labor force growth helping finding a stronger footing, specifically here in Alberta. Housing resales, you can see that compared to all of our peers, our housing resales are so basically sitting a lot higher than our peers, which supports the data that James is telling you, where everybody out there is selling their houses, living on these remote work jobs in perpetuity, and coming to where housing affordability is a lot better. Yes, that poses really good from a overall economic standpoint, but housing affordability starts to get materially worse for anybody now entering into the market. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Yes, it supports the local economy. However, there's a cost to that, and that is the cost of living and the cost of your houses in general. Now, population growth up and housing starts down. This is very important for Alberta as well. So we have net migration and net immigration. I'll talk specifically about Alberta. Net migration, net immigration going up, and our housing starts are going down. So when you pull basically on the supply side of the lever, them going down, on the demand side of the lever going up, housing prices are only going to go one way. That's a great, again, if you're already in the housing market, but if you're looking to afford a new house, affordability gets significantly worse. And then you compound that with rental prices going through the roof across the nation right now. This is just going to exacerbate that problem for everybody. Very in a stereotypical presentation by myself and James, a lot of data, very short amount of time, but kind of summing it all up for you guys. Alberta economy is a better chance of defying basically that gravitational pull of lower demand and higher interest rates than all of our peers. The characteristics of the post-pandemic world mean there's going to be a longer lag between rate hikes and the slowdown. We're not going to prevent a slowdown. We've heard the word soft landing by Bank of Canada and the feds. Basically, if soft landing is, can we raise interest rates so high to cause the economy to slow down without causing a recession? Personally, I don't think so. I think that damage is already done in terms of where that interest rate levels are at. But there's going to be a lag, as James kind of pointed to as well, before we see the full impact of those high interest rate cycles. Immigration and migration is supporting the labor supply, which helps to ease inflation, but it creates a housing boom. So everything comes at a cost. Yes, inflation is coming down, and immigration is helping that, but it's also causing the housing affordability to get a little bit worse. Interest rates are going to come in early 2024. How far and how quickly rates come is going to be different than prior cycles due to those kind of lingering supply constraints that we saw pre-COVID. We saw supply chain constraints where pre-COVID we were sitting in a just-in-time inventory situation where companies had, it was called it's called Six Sigma optimization, where essentially we want to maintain zero inventory to maintain minimal cost. And that way our profitability is at an all-time high. Then COVID happens. Now they're shifting to just in case inventory. So they're starting to build it out again, which is the complete reverse. So until that fully kind of shakes out and finds equilibrium, that's going to have a impact on interest rates coming as well. So interest rates are going to be cut. How quickly they start to be cut depends on the supply chain constraints, but we do see them kind of bottoming out by the end of Q4. With that, any questions for you guys?
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So with the number of people immigrating to Alberta, there's an apartment building north side of Lacombe, 96 units, and the manager is stating that the apartment is pretty much over half rented out, majority by people from Ontario and BC. So would that not increase the housing starts significantly more coming in 2024, 2025? That could be like, that would still be an inflation issue?
In theory, yes, it takes time for the companies to kind of reset that cycle as well. If you use oil and gas as the prime example, just because oil hit $100, you didn't see them doing a bunch of well exploration and all that. They just want to take that profit, right? In that short-term cycle. So that's kind of what you're seeing right now until you got to see that normalization. You only want to build and increase the supply if that's kind of more of a longer-term trend. But right now, you're not seeing the full impact of that. So I do think that there's going to be that increase. We just don't see that in the forecast yet.
But yet the rental rates have went up 30% in 3 years. So like, you would think you'd see more housing starts. Like, sorry, that's just.
Yeah, yes, but we also, if we go back to that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin as well is, yes, demand should be going up, but there's less supply in that demand forecast as well, because in 2020, anybody that's thinking about buying or getting into the housing game within the next 5 years, interest rates were so cheap, they basically stepped into that market then. So you're borrowing activity from the future arrives, you expect that activity to decrease with on the other side of this. So it's basically, again, the market's kind of found that equilibrium. So that's where that other side of the coin is. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, great question, Mr. Mayor. So the forecast, the short answer is we expect inflation rates to come down and stay there. The forecast for next year, I believe, is 2.1% on that chart. So the impact of these rate hikes, everything we kind of walked you through, is going to have an effect. It's just a matter of when, right? And we are seeing it already start to happen. The problem we often run into with boards and councils is, it is a rate of change, right? So yes, inflation rates are going to come down. We don't see them spiking back up to 8%. That was really just a culmination of low, like near zero interest rates for a really long period of time. Lots of fiscal stimulus created all these and supply demand imbalances that created this crazy high inflation numbers. The supply constraints are kind of easing now as kind of the world economies have been opening up. And then on the same time, I showed you kind of the impact of each 1% rate hike has on consumer spending. It does drag it down pretty significantly. So the short answer is inflation should kind of go like this, 3%, 2%, and stay there.
And just to add to what James is saying, the reason it's taking so long, right, is because when we saw inflation spike, the central bankers raised interest rates. Inflation at that time was rising because of supply chain issues, right? It's from the supply side of inflation. And when you raise interest rates, that's a demand issue, right? So you got the supply side inflation, you got demand side inflation. So supply side inflation was what's causing inflation to go up. Central bankers increased interest rates. When supply is causing it, they can't do anything but wait for the demand side to pick up. So going from 8% to 4% is very easy when supply chain shakes out. That 4% to down, you've heard the word inflation is very sticky. That's what they're referring to. It's the demand side of the equation. which as James pointed out, is gonna take some time, but we can dissect inflation 100 different ways. If you step back, it's a monetary policy issue. You raise the cost of debt, you raise how expensive it is for everything, eventually people are gonna stop spending. So it just takes time. It's just a matter of when.
Okay, and then along with that, you said that at least the central bank rate is gonna start to ease, and that is the middle of next year. And that's as a result, because it's working to somewhat curb that portion of inflation. Is that correct?
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
Thanks. Councilor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. So a couple of questions, and this is maybe a little bit outside of the presentation, but you were saying the price of oil right now is 80, just topping out over 80. And isn't the provincial budget generally built on $65? Like, is that?
Yes, so I forget the number, but every dollar swing, every dollar that press WTI changes, $600 million impact to our provincial budget in terms of revenue, to give you context of what that swing is.
Every dollar is a
Every
million.
dollar WTI is a $600 million impact in terms of where the revenue forecasts are. So given that level of volatility, it makes sense for them to kind of use a lower number for sustainability.
Totally.
Now, 2020, they had like $35 or $40 oil. So when we hit 80, obviously they have these large surpluses for obvious
Right.
reasons. Now, their forecast going for, they're not as optimistic. It's hard to put a budget together very optimistic when you have that level of volatility. So I personally don't pay attention too much to the number they're using for their price WTI, because that could change. There's so many material impacts that happen.
Fair. Then my second question was about these supply constraints, because when you sit around and you're talking to people, they're saying there's still labor shortages, there's still supplies shortages, and yet you're saying that it has been somewhat leveling out. But
Yeah.
you're going, so what?
There's pockets, right? So when we're
Yeah.
talking in terms of like supply constraints, that's like materials and goods and things
Mhm.
like that. There are pockets, if you look at the actual inflation numbers in certain regional areas where we're seeing deflationary pressures. So we're talking about inflation being very high, but there's some deflationary pressures in the US as well. So it's very, very hard to kind of figure out the dissecting. The one that's been very sticky and hard to figure out is the labor market. That's why I kind of took a pause there, where
Okay.
the labor market is one that's very hard to figure out right now.
Yeah, one more question. So just to follow up, can you one more time explain just in time and just in case?
Yeah, so just in time inventory was pre-COVID, where we want to carry no inventory in our warehouses, because every dollar in and every time we don't have to carry inventory in our warehouse. Everything in is everything out, zero cost to carry, our revenue is maximized. Well, then COVID happened and they had no supply to meet demand, and there was these massive bottlenecks. Now we're switching back to what's called just in case, where they're starting to build these supplies back up to meet this sporadic level of demand. So that's kind of the shift.
I don't see a bunch of other lights on, so I'll ask one more. You had some pretty interesting stats on the number of people that have moved to Alberta in the last 6 months or so. And I was curious, do those stats indicate whether they are, I guess, what would be the play with working individuals, or just individuals that are perhaps retiring and moving to what is seen as a more affordable environment?
That is a great question, which we are trying to get the answer to as well, because one sentence that I put in my presentation was, you're getting a lot of remote workers that can continue to work remote, come here and continue to work remote. Well, the conversation is, where you put supplying that back to, right? Where's that net benefit coming back to? So great question. We're looking for that data. It's a question we have asked. I don't have the answer for you. But I'd love to. Yeah.
Interesting. Do we have any other questions? Councilor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. And another one coming into play, I think, is also our generation succession turnover of estates, like the baby booming generation is dissolving.
Mhm.
How much does that, is that delaying the inflation because of the amount of assets coming into play to the inheritors? Because that's the baby boom generation transition.
In terms of delaying inflation, I don't think it would have a contribution. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think about that one.
It's a loaded question.
from a rate perspective, it like, we actually saw the reverse, right? So from like the COVID trend, a lot of like pre-retirements, nobody wanted to just continue working. We saw a lot of that impact. So from that side of the equation, should be baked in, but from a delaying inflation, it shouldn't have an impact. Really, it should. Yeah, it shouldn't delay inflation. It should pick it back up because let's say from a retirement perspective, people are going, hey, I need my dollar to stretch a lot further than it was in the past. So I can't keep spending like your financial plan would have to been adjusted at much lower numbers to adjust for that inflation and lower level of demand. And then from an estate perspective, it's hard to predict because it's all individual. Some people may be buying rental properties and things like that. There was an estate transfer perspective, but we don't see a lot of the estate transfer perspective right now. Right now, it's just pushing into retirement. So
Very good. We appreciate you coming to speak with us, and enjoy the rest of your time in Lacombe.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Right. I think the next item that we have up is by Senior Manager McKinnon, item 4.1, the 2024 budget direction. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's up so we can move on to traffic review. So, thanks. I'm joking. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy, and good evening, Mayor Creasy and Council. This fall, Council is scheduled to adopt the 2024 operating and 2024 capital budget, along with approving a 3-year operating and a 10-year capital plan for the City of Lacombe. The purpose of this committee meeting is for Council to provide direction to administration on budget targets, as well as a level property tax increase for 2024. Tonight, I will provide some information for Council to guide administration on what the 2024 budget target should be. I will begin with a recap of the 2023 approved budget. Then I will highlight Council policies that tie into the budget directly, and finally focus on the potential changes in revenue expenses for 2024. In 2023, the city's operating budget including transfers from reserves and internal transfers was $46.6 million. The 2023 attached operating revenue and expense graphs show the breakdown of this budget by categories. The 2023 final approved capital budget was $10.35 million. The 2023 capital budget categorized by funding source is also attached to this report. There are 4 council policies that tie into budget preparation. The first policy is a compensation policy. The city's compensation policy outlines the city's philosophy for determining the annual cost of living adjustment and market adjustment for staff. The policy states the cost of living, or COLA, will be equivalent to the Alberta Consumer Price Index. The Alberta Consumer Price Index is calculated based on an average of the Alberta CPI increases for the 12 months from July 1st to June 30th. The average Alberta Consumer Price Index increases for 12 months from July 2022 to 2023 was 5%. The second policy is the council remuneration policy. In 2021, council revised the city's council remuneration and expense policy, outlining the philosophy for determining compensation for members of council. Every budget year, council remuneration will be adjusted based at the discretion of council. Additional reviews may be done internally with consultant support or by a citizen remuneration committee. Remuneration shall focus on an equitable and reasonable compensation for duties performed on the city's behalf. The third policy is the annual budget and taxation policy. Section 4B of the policy states that the city shall use the July 1st Alberta Consumer Price Index as a targeted property tax increase. The June 2023 Alberta CPI is 1.9%. This means the average cost of goods purchased in June 2023 were 1.9% higher than the same goods purchased in 2022 of June. The average consumer price index increases for 12 months from July 1st to June was 5%. Administration is recommending continuing using the average consumer price index for the tax rate increase. Utilizing an average CPI ensures predictability, consistency, and fairness in property tax adjustments, and is a more accurate representation of the inflation trends. A 1.9% tax increase generates approximately $325,000 in additional tax revenue. Whereas a 5% tax increase translates to approximately $860,000 in additional tax revenue. Capital projects are funded by revenues, grants, or reserves, grants, and long-term debt, and other contributions. Reserves ensure the financial stability of ongoing capital projects. The 2023 Financial Reserve Policy provides guidelines for maintaining optimal balances. The attached 2024 Reserve Report shows reserve balances, council-approved commitments, and funds available to fund the 2024 capital budget and to contribute to the 10-year capital plan. Also included are the optimal balances suggested by the Financial Reserve Policy. For sustainable road maintenance, it is recommended to maintain special paving tax, 1% of the general tax, as well as increase the contribution to the roads reserve by 1% annually. The dedicated funding will ensure ongoing road repair, upkeep, enhanced safety, and efficiency. Long-term debt is a strategy for financing capital projects as well. The estimated cost of borrowing for $1 million today would require payments of principal and interest of $73,000 a year for 25 years, or $67,000 a year for 30 years. The long-term debt outstanding as of June 2023 is $23.6 million, with an average interest rate locked in at rates much lower than we could borrow today. This leads us to the fourth policy, the debt management fiscal policy. Section 4 of this policy limits the municipality to 75% of the debt limit established by the provincial regulation, MGA, and 75% of the debt service limit established by the provincial regulation, MGA. Also, the policy stipulates that debt service costs for supported debt will not exceed 20% of the taxes available for municipal purposes. Currently, the city's debt stands at 54% of the municipal debt limit, or 40% of the MGA limit. This means the city can borrow an additional $20 million and remain within the council policy. The debt servicing repayment of principal and interest is approximately $1.7 million per year. This is well within the $7.2 million that is set by the council policy, leaving $5.5 million of debt servicing remaining before council policy limit is reached. The city is also well below the maximum debt servicing limit for tax-supported operations of $3.4 million. Approximately $1.5 million of the current debt servicing is for tax-supported services. In conclusion, the city is well within the debt and servicing limits of the MGA and council's debt management fiscal policy. Now I will talk about the changes in revenue expenses projected from 2023 to 2024. In 2024, the estimated changes in revenue expenses include a $344,000 increase in revenue and a $2.2 million increase in expenses. The revenue change includes new revenue for tax revenue growth, for growth in municipal assessment based on a last 2-year trend. Franchise fees have not yet been finalized, but they may also impact revenues depending on the impact of the median rate. The expenditure change includes inflationary increases in electricity, natural gas, and fuel, personnel increases, including an annual COLA for staff and council aligned with the Alberta CPI index average from July 1st to June 30th, benefit increases, grid changes, market adjustments and classifications, and a new position request limited to 2% of the municipal tax revenue. Service level increases include porta potty services, annual bench program, DARP operating, ice and snow removal, capital project engagement strategy, and signs and street repair. Increased software licenses and professional services, and increased contribution to the roads reserve by the 1% annually. The City of Lacombe's 2024 projected net expenditures are $1.9 million higher than the 2023 net budget of $46.4 million. The net tax supported expenditure increase for 2024 is forecasted at $1.6 million, or equivalent to 9.35% tax rate increase. The anticipated net expenditure increase of 9.35% exceeds the annual budget taxation preparation policy or past practice by more than 4%. Tonight, administration seeks council's direction on setting a budget target or tax rate increase to help us prepare the 2024 operating and capital budget and plans. Council will need to consider directing a reduction in proposed expenses, tax stabilization through a withdrawal from the operating reserve, a variance from the budget or taxation preparation policy, or some combination of the above. Thank you for listening to tonight's report. I think CAO Gowdy has some comments to add.
Thank you, Senior Manager McKinnon. I did want to draw your attention to the appendix. It's one of the last appendixes. It looks like this. It's called City of Lacombe Reserve Balances.
I think there was an update that was passed out prior to
Thank you.
council.
There's an update because some of the formatting actually cut off the names of two of the last restricted reserves on the original one that went out. But what I wanted to draw your attention to is the optimal balances versus the available for 2024 and how close those numbers are getting. Sometimes I think as a municipal government, it's easy to overlook some of the successes that you've had and some of the decisions that you've made that have turned out really well. And so I did want to point out just to highlight a few of these reserves and point where they were if I look back between 4 and 6 years where some of these were. So the general operating reserve where you have about $2 million, well above your optimal balance, that reserve actually had $0 when you started, the majority of you, 2 terms ago. The police operating reserve, same thing, 0. The utilities operating reserve still at 0, but that is something where you're in a position to tackle that now. The active and open spaces reserve was in a negative balance until just 3 years ago. The accessible transportation reserve is a small reserve. It actually wasn't in too bad of shape, and it remains healthy. The fire equipment reserve was in a negative balance until 2 years ago, last year, thank you. The fleet and equipment replacement reserve has actually always been fairly well managed, credit to our manager of fleet over the years, and so it remains healthy. The general capital reserve is in a better position than it was when you took over. The information and technology replacement reserve, again, was actually a well-managed system by the manager of IT, and so that was in a good spot. The police capital reserve had no balance. The roads reserve was underfunded and not able to meet the commitments. Going back a number of years, there were times that we actually borrowed money to pave roads. Solid waste reserve was in a somewhat healthy balance. Stormwater system reserve was almost 0. The wastewater system reserve, it actually was in a healthy balance because we're building up funds to put towards the regional sewer system, which has since been funded and constructed. The water system reserve was also in actually a healthy position. Community Builder Fund, you have more money than you started. The Environmental Reclamation Reserve at $400,000, it was below 100,000 then. The Land Reserve, it's in a negative because you have land for resale to offset that cost, but there was a great differential between what was actually in the inventory and what was held as a negative balance in the Land Reserve, which has been shrunk over the past 5 years to where you actually do have land worth the negative balance in your reserve. And the municipal art reserve is there to support the mural program, and it was in a healthy position actually before as well. The externally restricted reserves I won't go through in detail, but I think it's something that this group should be proud of. I know we are as an administration to see the available reserve balances at 8.3 million come very, very close to the optimal balances that were recently adopted by council at 9.1 million. When we looked at past targets, it was a $5 million target, which was only met through some creative cobbling together of all of the reserves, including these externally restricted reserves, which really are not available for you to use as you see fit. So that is something that I think is worth noting, something to be proud of. And it also puts the city in a great spot to limit some and smooth some of these inflation factors that you're hearing about today from our advisors and that you obviously are seeing in the world. So when we come and say 9.5% tax rate, obviously that's not palatable. I would even say, having worked with this group for quite some time, a 5% is probably not a reasonable target. I think it would be reasonable, both administratively and for the community, to be aiming for a 4% tax rate increase coming into 2024 with a 3% COLA. And the reason that I would recommend something lower for COLA than the tax rate increase is that we have completed our salary survey, and it has shown that you're within the correct range for pay. And so this year, it's not a major catch-up year as we've had with previous salary surveys. It's actually just a year in which you're trying to anticipate what your comparators will be offering for COLA and match that to make sure you're staying competitive. So the other change that Senior Manager McKinnon did talk about, but I wanted to highlight, was the change in the way we've budgeted for.
CEO, before you go on there on that sheet that you're on, the 2023 optimal balance numbers that are quoted there, is that funded? Is that been accounted for already?
So these optimal balances were the balances that council adopted at your most recent reserve review. And so those are what we're recommending, and that there's the calculation there as to how we got those. Those are what we are recommending should be the targets within those reserves, which would put you in you're already in an enviable position in terms of the financial position of the municipality, but this would put you in an optimal position to meet all of your expectations over the next 10 years.
Okay, and that says 2023 optimal reserve or optimal balance. That's at the end of this year. That's what it's to be. Is that reflected in the numbers that are outlined in the current?
Those are what we're comparing against when we
Okay.
look at the 2024. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So if I just go back to the growth in staff, in the past, we have proposed specific positions, and we do kind of get bogged down in debating the merits of specific positions, which is kind of a fake exercise in a way, because of course, the administration ends up structuring itself how it deems best to meet your strategic objectives. And so sometimes positions that were approved for a budgetary increase 2 years later would be done away with and absorbed into some other way of providing that same service. And so we thought that it slows things down. And after going through this last year, Councillor Connick had a proposal which we grabbed onto to say, well, shouldn't we just have a consistent, it should match the growth. If there's 2% growth in the community, 2% growth in the staff would make sense, rather than seeing these, well, we're going to ask for 6 positions and hope we get 2, and then maybe we'll structure them as we proposed, or maybe they'll be delivered slightly differently. And so we have included just a growth number there. I do want you to know that of the approximately $330,000 that is represented by that 2% increase, that is over $800,000 of requested staff proposals that we have received as a corporate leadership team from our management team for legitimate, genuine desires for better service provision for residents from our managers. And so we are already holding to less than half of those requests. Not that is, but I do want council to know we're doing some pre-screening and really making sure that we're bringing you a budget that we think can be delivered. And that's where I go back to that 4% and a 3% COLA. We could see that being delivered without impact to service or staff, and an acceptable impact to residents. With that, we're interested to hear your discussion and any direction you might have.
Thank you, CEO Gotti. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I envy and proud to be in this position, both in reserves and so forth. But one thing I quite often don't see is a number reflecting on our increase in tax generation. I think we've seen some commercial retail significant growth in the last 2-3 years, apartment building, retail stores and so forth. And I guess I'm always kind of curious, how much is that reflected on an increase in putting us in a, you want to see that. It's wonderful to see that growth in the last 2-3 years, because you think, oh, great, it puts us in a better position, because I think since this group's been together, we've been advocating for more growth to, because, okay, we have a discussion on a swimming pool for $500,000, $2 million on a slide, when really the facilities met its maximum growth. Should that be in something that needs to be in the capital replacement, and so forth. And that, in 10 years, any swimming pool could be $30 million, or road construction from 50th Street North CNE Trail, $10 million. Like, that's where reserves, and I think it's a wonderful thing, but I yet to see in the pre-budget planning is how much has our taxation income growth affected our position. Because that's just a curiosity, so.
CEO Gotti?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Through to Councillor Ross. If you go to page 5 of the report to committee, that is something that perhaps we should have highlighted as well. We have aligned the growth projections in the past. That is a legitimate concern that there's been an under budgeting for the amount of growth the city has gotten. Now, historically, there hasn't been a lot of growth, but when we look at the past years and our building permit numbers, we said it would be reasonable if we're proposing a 2% growth for staff, that we would also have a 2% growth in the municipal assessment. And so we do have that on page 5 at the top. It totals $344,000 of new growth that we're anticipating this year. And that would be on top of, that's actual new growth. That would be on top of appreciation of existing property values.
Sir Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. We just heard tonight that the CPI is 3.1. You're suggesting 4 as an increase. I guess I'm interested to hear the rationale, unless I'm misunderstanding these numbers, but I heard these gentlemen say 3.1. So why would you recommend 4 as an increase in our budget?
So they aren't here. I believe that the 3.1 was actually a projection of what they see as the 2023. When we look at the average of the past 12 months, it's actually 5%. And so the 4% would be a reduction from what's been experienced over the past 12 months.
So that is an interesting question, though, because when we adopted this policy, when we were, I would say, more of a stable period in the economy overall, works pretty good. But when we have these vast fluctuations since COVID and after, it becomes very difficult. When you looked at only a month ago, it was under 2. And now over the last year or so, you had said that it calculated out to be 5%. Thankfully projected to be next year at earlier than this time to be down around that 3%, call it. So I guess it's just a hard thing to justify because the COLA is so impactful to have it a high number. It is very impactful to our overall change in the overall budget, which naturally it should be because personnel costs are by far the biggest part of the budget. I guess I would just like to see us perhaps try and ease back on that a bit in the overall tax increase as well. And that's not to take away any of the hard work that's been done from administration, increasing those reserve funds and operating efficiently. But I just think that the entire reason for having the cost of living adjustment is to keep us in line in those interim years and the non-survey years with other communities. And I really don't think that we're quite at the point yet where we're going to be seeing very massive increases across the board in all municipalities that we compare to. So I think that we should perhaps be a little more conservative. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I do definitely appreciate page 5, especially 2 comments. One with regards to COLA, of course, as was already previously mentioned. What's on this piece of paper is a 5%, easily our largest expenditure increase, like 2% dent, like removing 2%, for example, would make a considerable step towards trying to achieve a lower overall increase. I'd say, oh, I guess the other point that I would make is all of those lines, with the exception of one, are also all ongoing, except for, well, I guess 2 one-time, and then the rest are all ongoing costs. Like, these aren't even additions. These are just things that are just getting more expensive. I do appreciate administration coming and saying that perhaps a 4% and 3% is a realistic goal post. I would agree with that. I'm not sure that I would say that that's the final number, but right now we just need a target, something to build a budget on. And so I think that those would be fair numbers. That would be my opinion to start as a goal post, to then have our big discussion, when we do our budget workshop in the fall. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Councillor Dallas.
Thank you, Mayor Casey. Thank you for this presentation. Thank you for the numbers. The $1.9 million is certainly concerning. Councillor Hibb just kind of mentioned it. There is some one-time spendings on there. I think they add up to approximately $250,000. So you bring that down to 1.65 million. But I guess this is a question: should we just count on a similar numbers of one-time spending for the 2024? So that will be a part of our continued budget, just in other line items, not necessarily these ones. And then in regards to this, like, I think we certainly need to look at our service levels. And one of the discussions that happened recently was in regards to snow removal for the whole city. And we see this large increase with this, and that is part of a tax increase. And I just think we need to be responsible when reviewing items like that. And sure, it doesn't sound like a lot, but at the end of the year, when we see not a lot a whole bunch of times, it certainly adds up. So that's a concern to me. In regards to the cost of living, I just, the charts in here, and every year for the last 5 years, there's been an increase in pay due to that. I think it's not that it's not well deserved, but I'm just not sure that you see that in other organizations where every single year you get a raise. And I liked Mayor Creasy's point to that, where it's for certain years when you can't catch up. Otherwise, it certainly seems like we're artificially inflating wages with our comparator communities when we do it 1 year and then the next year they look at us and it's like, oh, Lacomb's higher than us, and they do it. And it just seems like a back and forth ladder chase. But that is just my opinion on that. So I guess if I can just get an answer on the $250,000, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dallas. Yeah, certainly it varies from $250,000 depending on any given year, but I can't think of a year where we haven't had one-time costs. So yes, there's a reasonable expectation that in any given year, you're going to have between 1 and 300,000 of one-time costs, I would say. So now, having said that, last year there would have also been that amount. So by that same logic, these aren't actually increases necessarily, because there was corresponding decreases from whatever happened last year that isn't happening one time this year. But your point is well taken. Every year there's one-time costs, so they do become ongoing things that the municipality always faces. Your point about the $62,000 for ice and snow removal, what I'd like to do is ask Director Thompson. I assume he's not going to be able to answer this right now, but for the upcoming, when we do debate the budget, it would be nice to know between the $62,000, how much is related to increased service provider fees versus an increase in service level itself?
Sure. Thanks, Diego. You're right. I don't have the answer today, but certainly we have an upcoming presentation scheduled for the council in September. We'll make sure to highlight those differences so that administration and council has that for their decision making.
Thank you for that. While we're on the one time, I'm just curious, nearly $100,000 for uniforms and safety gear. Is there something in particular that accounts for the bulk of that? I mean, it's not like we don't have uniforms and safety gear now, so obviously it's a fairly substantial bump. What is that for?
All the detail for you. It's a combination of police and fire mostly. I'm just going to pull the information quickly.
I'd have been much happier if you said it was something that was required for every employee, then it's only $1,000 a head. But if it's just for fire and police, this is a fairly significant cost for.
Yeah, it's a new gear for and turnout gear for police or for fire in particular, and uniforms and police.
If you're able to find it over the evening, you can let us know. I'm not
Sure.
going to dwell on it. Just, it's a pretty large number.
There's a lot of PPE and new stuff that's coming out for both.
Councillor Conick.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yeah, I don't want to delve into this too much tonight, the particulars, but I have a quick question about debt servicing. Is that reflected? Because I'm just trying to remember now, last year's budget. I don't know if it's the coming year or the year after we see a significant in relates to public works. And how is that reflected in here? Or is that something a different line item altogether?
We borrowed 4 million for the Public Works building in June, so that reflects that increase. So we did pay off debt in 2022. We've now added that 4 million, and we're still below where we were last year, but that is expected to maintain us now. There is 1 million left to borrow for the Public Works building, with potential options to maybe use an operating reserve versus borrowing and hopefully reduce our borrowing coming up. But that includes all the borrowing for most of the borrowing for the Public Works building, that current number.
Okay, but there's no particular line item that talks to that here, right?
No, because we actually budgeted for borrowing this year in 2023.
Okay.
So it's reflected in there already.
Thank you. I wanted that clarification. And so the projection is 4 and 1 plus 3% COLA. Is that what you're suggesting?
That would be nice.
Thank you. Okay, no, I guess I'm leaning a little more towards the mayor's comments. I'd love to see a 3 and 1 and maybe a 2% COLA. And then I'm not opposed. I don't know what other councilors' thoughts on this are, but I mean, if we get those numbers, I'm not opposed into dipping into general operating a little bit to make up the 2%. That would be 344,000. If we find that we need to, we can take some from reserves. I like the balances. I don't want to do that too often, but I'd rather come in with a lower number myself, see what that looks like. And then if we find, you know what, we still have to come up with 200, 300,000, well, maybe we take that from reserves for 1 year. I don't know, but that's what I'm leaning towards. Thank you.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I just want to go back to the reserve balances a little bit. So when we have a surplus, does it always automatically go into operating reserve? It does not, you're saying, because when you, I guess just to really make this work in my brain, when you look at optimal worth versus what's available, like the operating reserve, general operating reserve is very high compared to what optimally should be there, or for the police, it's double basically. So why are we not putting surpluses then into different reserves or, yeah.
We
Chief
did.
Gotti? Oh, I'm sorry. Whoever wants to answer this, Chief Gotti, I'll let you start.
So I missed saying this and I knew Tracy was probably cringing. The $2.1 million general operating reserve, what I think you should look at doing there, and the reason that we've only borrowed 4 million for the Public Works building is that you should use a good portion of this, probably the portion over the optimal balance, to defer or defray any borrowing costs associated with that building. And that is going to give you those savings on an ongoing basis from debt servicing that you were talking about, Councillor Conick. So it's a slightly different mechanism, but it accomplishes the same thing. Rather than doing a tax stabilization withdrawal, you actually lower the overall borrowing costs for the municipality, and it's a gift that keeps on giving then every year from then on.
Which is around the $1.5 million portion of it. Yes. Councillor Ross. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. You were finished. Go ahead.
That the last year surplus we did put it into the general capital reserve, knowing that that's where it has the best use. So we can definitely transfer from reserves. This is just how they sit right now. We could rearrange the reserves anytime council wishes to do that, but this is the balances as they sit after the financial reserve policy was approved.
Best use may be argued by some departments, but the most flexible application anyway. Okay. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So if I recall last year, we were proposed a 5.4 and we did a 5. And actually, when you look back upon it, that number worked out pretty much bang on. I still support the 4 and 3 because this still leaves us an option in reserves that if interest rates don't come down and we pursue the building of the fire hall, then you still have the reserves to reduce debt servicing costs with that option as well. Anyways, and that's because I think we already do have the interest secured and the borrowing for public works. Is that correct? So I know it just by going 4 and 3, it still gives you the option to go forward with fire hall in 2024. If interest rates do not come down, then you're still not committed to the amount of debt servicing by using reserves for that project as well. Is that true? You could, if you still keep our reserves like very well established, that we still interest rates don't come down for the borrowing for the fire hall hypothetically in 2024, you can still use reserves to lower that debt servicing then for that commitment. Correct?
Yes, that is correct. I like that line of thinking. I also want to remind you, or maybe project out, if we look at our most recent quarterly reports, you are on track to have a surplus this year as well, due to a number of factors. And so you will likely be adding an additional couple $100,000 to your general capital reserve or your operating reserve to again defray those costs or more. When I say a couple $100,000, I'm confident it'll be at least that.
I guess one item that we have not talked about is our 1% special paving tax. And I think we need to remember that that is in addition to these numbers, is it not?
Yes, that is correct.
So the overall impact would be, by saying 4% to this actually means 5% to ratepayers. So that's something I'd like for us to keep in mind as well. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I mean, the 4 and 3, 4 seems a little high to me, but it's a good starting point. I have a question regarding taxation and the inflation on the housing in Lacombe as it increases. How much does that increase our revenue? Quite a bit.
It is a direct increase to the revenue, but I would also say when our assessor applies provincial increases, they are typically much lower numbers than you might conclude just from hearing anecdotes around the community. And so often when we look, you're seeing annual growth numbers in the 1.5% to 2.5% range for pricing, despite that not necessarily matching what I'm commonly hearing and what people are commonly hearing with house sales. So there is a lag between assessed value change and market value change that's typically going to be a year or more. So it does increase, you're absolutely correct, but it's not gonna be 5 or 10% increase. This year, the entire assessment growth and base growth accounted for, do you remember the number?
Approximately 400,000, but we separate out new growth from assessed value. So if our municipal taxes is going to be 16 million, different assessed values don't change that overall tax collected. We still collect 16 million, it just gets distributed differently. So if your assessed value went up, you may be paying a little bit higher because your mill rates, you've got more value to be attached to the mill rate, but it doesn't change the overall amount we're collecting for the whole city. The growth does, and that's what we're trying to do a better job of budgeting. We've been budgeting 100,000 for growth. We've been getting 300,000 to 400,000 in the last 2 years. So we're trying to reflect that in our preparation to include that in so that we don't have to come back and say, we actually collected more than we budgeted because of growth. We're trying to project that better.
So I must be a little dim because I'm still suffering jet lag from getting home yesterday from Europe. When you said the prices go up, so my house is now valued at 300,000, my taxes go up, but we don't get any more money, the city?
No, because the mill rate is taking the total assessed value by what we need to collect. So it's the whole,
But
yeah, the assessed value before growth. We separate what's growth as a separate category. So it's taking, so if we have more assessed values in some houses, they may be paying a higher distribution be based on that assessment, but the ones who haven't increased their assessment aren't paying any more. The ones that have gone down are paying less. So the overall tax revenue collected by the city is the same. We divide the whole assessment for the whole city of Lacombe by what we need to collect to come up with a mill rate.
CEO Gotti?
So to put it in another way, Councillor Gullickson, you said my assessment goes up, my taxes go up. Actually, all things being equal, if all of the properties across the city go up by the same amount as yours went up, you would not see any increased tax. So if suddenly Lacombe was the most desirable place in Canada and in 1 year, all assessed values doubled, the municipality would not collect actually anymore.
Yeah.
You would just pay less per 100,000 of your house, but your actual tax bill would be the same, despite having a doubling of the assessed value.
But okay, so the revenue the city is collecting is the same, but my tax bill could still go up. Because mine went up and somebody else's.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say, depending if you did some renovations, for example, and others didn't, that kind of thing could.
Okay, all right, so it doesn't affect the numbers. Okay, thank you.
And plus, it's not an immediate thing either. There's a lag, a time lag too. Any other questions or concerns, Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. So I apologize for reading while we were sitting here, but I got an article this week about the basic structure or formula for the police commission in Edmonton. I don't know if you saw it. You saw it. Okay. So I guess kudos to Councillor Connick that he was saying that staffing would be a percentage of population growth because that is kind of this formula that they use. But it is always, yeah, funding. I guess I'm liking what I'm hearing about the percentage of growth, and then what Councillor Dallas was saying too. Like in some ways, one-time expenses could be just listed as one-time expenses on the budget, and then there might not be an increase, like you were saying, CEO Gowdy. So those things make a lot of sense. Those predictable things from year to year potentially if we're using population growth. But I'm still good with 4 and 3 or 5 and 3. I think we should maybe just start saying that so that we're really honest with what's going on here. But certainly if we can cut some of this to bring it down to 4 or 3 and 3, that would be great.
So the only thing that I'm not clear on yet is when people quote these numbers is if in fact that includes the 1% paving tax, or is that in addition to it? Because that's substantial change, that additional point. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just so you're clear with my comments, I say a 4 and 3 as a start, as a goalpost, and that is also that is not including the 1%. That's just assuming that we're also talking about the 1% paving tax. So I just make that assumption that that one's the holy grail and it's not changing. So I'm just talking about the 4% overall change, like regular change, and the 3% for COLA.
I was good up until the last comment. You said overall. So it's not overall. It's
That's why I corrected myself. I meant for the general, the main budget, not as well as the 1%, but that 1% is separate. I don't count that in my 4 and 3. I'm not talking about that. That one's untouchable, I guess. That's a better word.
Thank you. Councillor Konik. Are you including the 1 or no?
I specifically said 3 and 1. So
realize
3 plus a 1, so 4% total. Councillor Hibbs, I think, is saying just 4% plus 1. The 1 is over and above. Anyways, I think there's a consensus here, so I'm not with the consensus, but that's okay.
Councillor Dallas on that question.
I guess I didn't make any comments on the percentage. I stand with the people like any comments I will make on the percentages will not be including the 1% paving taxes. That is its own special thing.
Councillor Ross.
I'll echo Councillor Hibbs. I'm still a strong proponent on reserves because I just historically, we can say that, say inflation comes down to that 3.5%. I don't think prices or quote or costs on our future of new buildings will go down. When inflation goes down to 4, I don't foresee cost of living going down that 4 or 5%. When in our lifetime do we see things come down? Once they've went up, they stay there, in my opinion. So I'm still a proponent on, as Councillor Hibbs said, 4 and 3 plus 1.
Thank you, Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Starting point of 4% with the 1 on top, but I'd like to see us down at 3 also
which you can't have both ways.
I can.
Okay.
I would like to see us get there, but a starting point of 4%.
Thank you. And Councillor Hoekstra.
4 and 3.
And with the question?
I am with Councillor Hibbs said it very well. That one's over here. I'm following what CEO Gowdy's suggesting. 4% on the budget, 3 COLA.
4 and 3 and 1. Okay, very good. Thank you. I think that offers some clarity to administration how to structure things for our next meeting. So thank you for that. Councillor Dallas.
Thank you. I'll give you the 4 and 3. I'll give an official word on it. Thank you. 4 and 3 plus 1 additional special paving tax. Yeah.
That's the way we understood you last time. I thought.
Okay. I didn't say a percentage, so I just figured I better get it out there so everybody was clear.
Super. All right. Any other items for budget direction? Very good. We'll move into item 4.2. Director P. Shea for the traffic bylaw review, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So tonight I'm introducing some proposed changes for the traffic bylaw. A traffic bylaw, of course, is a local law that supplements and complements the traffic laws established by the province. They're implemented to address specific traffic-related issues and ensure the safety and orderliness of the roads and public spaces in a local area. Our current traffic bylaw was developed in 1995 and has had 16 proposed amendments. But during this time, the fines and fees have never been updated. Over the last year, there were 2 changes that were proposed to council that would require amending the bylaw if the initiatives were to move forward. The first one is the enforcement on private property, where vehicles may be towed at the vehicle owner's expense with the proper requirement of signage and a witness statement. The other is a temporary road closure permit, where a fee may be applied depending on the closure duration. The rest of the bylaw was also reviewed while drafting these amendments for those first two initiatives. And some of the areas that are being brought forward to be addressed are the following. So one of them is heavy vehicles. Currently, our city defines a heavy vehicle as 6.3 meters and 5,500 pounds. However, personal pickup trucks these days are longer than 6.3 meters and would require to be removed from our residential streets should we apply that bylaw immediately. What we're proposing is that we increase a heavy vehicle as 8 meters or 26.5 feet. The weight is fine as it is in alignment with many of our other municipal comparators. Also with heavy vehicles, in our current bylaw, we talk about designated areas, but yet we don't designate any areas for parking for semi-trucks and heavy vehicles. So we're proposing that, or we're recommending that we use the area on 56th Street and 46th Street and 45th Street between 50th Avenue and 56th Avenue as parking areas. So that's the street along where Reg's Wrecking is, and Tim Hortons is 46th Street. And then 45th Street is where you go down from Wendy's down to Mackenzie area there. So having parking in that area there, so is what's being proposed for the new bylaw. Some parking restrictions that we're proposing is to align more with the Traffic Safety Act. Quite often, the language within the Traffic Safety Act, or the language in the Traffic Safety Act, provides specific distances and clear reasoning of why a certain action is a violation. So identifying one-way streets and parking against traffic flow or parking a certain distance away from a curb is one of the areas that we're going to be proposing in the new bylaw. More street maintenance warning. So in 2021, it was found to be problematic when we were doing street maintenance enforcement and parking signs were put out, or no parking signs were put out only 12 hours prior to the actual street maintenance. So we're recommending that we change that to 24 hours, because even since a lot of the times of the pandemic was happening, people are still working at home. They don't get out sometimes over the evening to see those parking signs. So we're proposing a 24-hour warning time in there. With recreational vehicles on public roadways. So recreational vehicles, they must still adhere to the same rules of the road as any other vehicle. On a public street without any signage, they can remain on the street for 72 hours without moving it. However, we've been finding that there are some residents that have been using the public streets as their permanent storage solutions for the recreational vehicles. Moving them slightly when they've just been given a 72-hour notice warning or a ticket. So unfortunately, these residents don't understand, or they don't see the impact on their neighborhood or their neighbors. And in researching other municipalities, it is common for them to be telling residents that they can remove their vehicles for 72 hours. And this doesn't mean to just move it around the corner or move it across the street. It has to actually be off the public streets within the city for 72 hours. So that is one of the areas that we're proposing as well. The sign selection, signs section in the traffic bylaw is addressed in other areas in the city with other bylaws. So the community standards bylaw, as well as the land use bylaw, has a sign section, and so we're suggesting to remove signage out of the traffic bylaw. So sidewalk hazards is another area that we're looking at. Our bylaw currently states specific to extension cords cannot be extended across sidewalks. However, there's more things than just extension cords as tripping hazards. Hoses, toys, all sorts of things can be a tripping hazard. So we want to reword that section to include any tripping hazards in the bylaw. Snow and ice on sidewalks. So when it comes to snow and ice, one of the limiting factors that our bylaw enforcement officers come up against is the wording stating about that they have to wait in 48 hours after the last snowfall to enforce. So what we're recommending to change is to clean the language up to deem that a covered sidewalk could be a safety concern and that it allows for immediate removal of snow and that they can go in and enforce it immediately. Towing fees is another area that we're looking at proposing as a change. So ever since we've worked with our local towing company, they have never increased their towing fees. It's stayed at the same $50 for 20 some years, 30 some years. So they have notified the city saying that they are going to be increasing their towing fees. So because we have to have a specified amount in there, we're recommending to increase that to $100 for now.
And excuse me, Director Piche, so for that item, does it have to be one specific amount or is it going to be a range? Or a minimum or a,
Because it's a specified penalty, it has to be a specific amount. Like it's part of the specified penalty section. We can't, because I asked the same thing. I asked, can we just have it, whatever the fine is, plus towing fees?
Right.
And it isn't something, but we are going to be doing a legal review. So I can see if there's wording that maybe our lawyers would have on that where we can maybe specify it if that works a little bit better. But right now, as far as I understand, it has to be a specified amount for that. So
because I think we're going to have people that are going to ask, well, what happens when someone doesn't clean up their yard and the city sends in people that it has quite a range? And how do they differ is going to be the confusion.
So this is specific to street maintenance and where we're ticketing and towing vehicles for that $100 is that it would be a flat rate of $100 for the tow fee. So it's not to do anything with cleanup or anything like that. It's specific to just towing vehicles.
I realize that.
Oh, sorry.
But that is quite a range. That's not a specific, we don't have a specific amount to mow a yard or clean up a yard. It's whatever we're charged for that service. And I guess I'm just trying to grasp how that's different between hiring a subcontractor to clean up a yard or whatever, or a subcontractor to tow an automobile.
So the subcontractor does it does apply to a property, not so much as a vehicle. So with the amount for the cleanup fees, we can apply that to the property and the property it works with, which can be then applied to the property tax when it isn't cleaned up. However, with the towing fee, we cannot do anything.
That's the one I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay, okay, thank you. So then speaking of fees and fines and penalties, so as I mentioned earlier, that the penalties and violations have not been updated on this bylaw since its adoption. So administration did review 7 other municipal comparators for traffic bylaws, and many of them have not updated, or a few of them have not updated their bylaws. But of those who have updated their bylaws within the last 5 years, the city is considerably lower than those that have done those updates. So we have gone through and matched up a lot of what their other similar comparators are charging at this time. However, I have a little story to tell you guys. So last fall, I was in the city of Red Deer, and I was at an appointment, and my appointment ran long. And I walked out of my appointment where I was, and sure enough, there was a ticket on my window, and I like go and get it, and I'm like, oh darn it. So I got a ticket, and it was $65, just a parking ticket, just a general parking ticket. I was like, oh man. So it kind of surprised me. However, when I read it a little closer, it says if I pay within 10 days, it's only $30. And I was like, wow, that's that's a deal. So I ran home, paid that ticket right away, and then I kept that ticket because you can pay online through the city of Red Deer. Kept that ticket, brought it into our office and said, how do we do this? Because I wanted to pay that $30. I wanted to go ahead and say like, okay, I'm not dealing with the $65. I want to pay this $30. How do I do this? And then I thought, how do we do this within our city? And it isn't hard. It's just really changing the bylaw is what it is. But with the amounts of the fees that we are increasing, even with that and doing an incentivized program where we cut the rate that we're going to have people pay, we would still probably maintain the same amount of fine revenue and such that we would see now, if not more, probably, if people are actually paying quicker than what they would if they wait their time for the 21 days and it gets paid out or processed as to a provincial ticket. And then if we go into a provincial ticket system, the province actually ends up taking 46.3% of our fine revenue. So if we can incentivize people to pay the amount sooner and earlier, all that 100% of that amount comes to the city. So one of the proposals that we're putting forward is to do a more incentivized program where people can pay their fine earlier and it's at a reduced rate and it just comes through to the city directly at 100%. So yeah. So aside from that, the other changes that we're looking at are just some minor tweaks of wording and process and such as well. But we are looking for feedback. If there's any questions or anything specific, I am happy to take them now and get direction from council. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Piche. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So you might have actually answered this question with those last comments about the city getting 100%. So one of my questions was why duplicate the Safety Act, the Traffic Safety Act from all, the province in our municipal if we don't need to, it's already exists. So would that be because then we can write a municipal ticket and not have to write a provincial ticket?
That is 100%. If we can write a municipal ticket first, quite often you can use those fees. You can set your own rates first off. If the TSA or the Traffic Safety Act is higher, quite often, again, you can use that as a bit of a leverage of going easy on people a little bit, saying, look, I'm going to just write a municipal ticket. And now if we say we'll come in within 10 days, it's only going to be this amount and they can come in and pay it. Again, if it's going through the provincial system, of course, the province is going to take their share.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. So you answered that almost ahead of me asking it. Great. So one of the other things that I had listed here was we had talked somewhat recently about, the legality of e-scooters, whether they're owned or whether they're like, they're the rental company that's in the community, one is legal, one is not. So again, I ask that when this is brought for review, that is one of the considerations. So that would be potentially even straightening out the language on bikes, like where just regular old pedal bikes, where they can be used legally in the city. E-bikes should probably be addressed because I get questions about that too. And it would just be so much easier if I could just point them to a municipal bylaw. And of course, e-scooters, as I mentioned. So I'd love to see that clarification in a bylaw update. And then my last question was in regards to the rec vehicle, because I too have noticed the sort of dance of a rec vehicle being moved this side of the street, that side of the street. Is a public street and public parking considered the same by the city? Because I also noticed where there was a recreational vehicle showing up in the parking lot and then it wasn't there and then it was back again. So to me, it was like, okay, I know what they're doing, but from an enforcement point of view, how does that work?
Absolutely. Within our public parking, we do have 72 hours. Again, putting signage up, education and such is helping with that situation. We will be looking at doing the signage for no overnight parking without permission. There are times that we do have permission where people are able to use public parking lots. So we will be putting information out for that.
Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Thank you for the changes that you outlined. To your last point about the reduction in the fee, I think that's a terrific idea because you're always annoyed you get the ticket, but then you maybe feel better because you pay it quicker and as you get a reduction, I think that's a win-win. A couple of points, it talks about here, no owner or occupant under rec vehicle, under rec vehicles can park on their front yard, which is terrific. I know Councillor Doss, I believe, and so maybe a few others had brought that to your attention. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't be looking to a little bit at corner lots and side yards, because I see, I don't know, maybe it's not, maybe it doesn't really bother me, but it just seems a little odd that, okay, I'm not going to park in my front yard, but I'm going to jam it on my side yard because I'm a corner lot. And you've got this motorhome on a spot that barely fits the motorhome, and there it is. So I don't know if that's something we should be looking at as well. I echo Councillor Hibbs's comments on the e-scooters and bikes in general. I think we need clarification. And maybe it's just I don't know if I'm reading it right, but it talks about no person shall ride, coast, or propel any cart, sled, toboggan, skis, ice skates, roller skates, rollerblades, or skateboards, or any similar device in an unsafe manner on a sidewalk. But they can if they're acting safely, or is it saying if you're on a skateboard, you shouldn't be on the sidewalk?
Is that in our current bylaw that you're
Yes.
reading?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's been slid right over to the revision word for word too. So it's just on page whatever page that is. It's yeah, just under sidewalk hazards.
Oh, yes, I see. 6.3 part B. Yes, they are looking at that. I will have to clarify with bylaw enforcement as to what no person should. They're
I guess my point being, I'd rather see a kid on rollerblades on the sidewalk
Yes.
than on the street.
I know when
Right.
we addressed that in last September, I believe it was, that we were addressing scooters, or 2 Septembers ago, 2 years ago, the scooters. We did make some changes to ensure that children were on sidewalks. So I'm thinking that that's that could be what that was regarding.
I mean, even
and it was just really moving it within a section.
yeah, that's
because-
all you're
yeah,
doing here. But
yeah.
I guess I'm just looking for
More
like, some
clarification.
clarification there.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to see a kid on rollerblades, roller skates, or a skateboard on the street. It needs to be on the sidewalk. And even to that, I mean, I get the whole bicycle thing. In theory, bikes should be on the streets, especially e-bikes. But I don't want a 6-year-old on his bike on the street.
Yeah.
He needs to be on the sidewalk, right? I don't know I don't know if that's just a discretionary thing then that the bylaw officer or police officer has, and that you put it in there and just say, oh, obviously they shouldn't be on this. But I don't know how it just troubles me that we're
Okay.
saying you shouldn't be on a skateboard on a sidewalk. I think you should be. I don't know.
I'll certainly note that, and we'll do some research and get some wording in there for you.
CO Gowdy?
So the intent would be safe riding of whatever, it has to be there. But what I'm hearing is that maybe there would be something where we would say adults would not be permitted to be riding bicycles on the sidewalk, youth would, something that we can put some options together for that.
And sorry if I may, even adults, I don't have a problem with on the sidewalk if they're operating safely, but do I want to see our CAO whipping down the sidewalk at 40 clicks on his e-bike? Probably not. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. It's just like, again, I'd rather get. Just, I don't know. I don't know how you figure that out, but it just kind of bugs me.
So Director Piche, there was one question for sight lines and RV parking on corner lots. And I don't have the wording the way that is now. I know we have some rules for vegetation. Would that not apply for sight lines for obstructions, period?
Yes, and I believe that there is already wording in there about that.
Okay.
But we'll definitely make sure. But I'm pretty.
That's what I had
confident
thought
it's
too,
there.
but yeah, thank you, because that's,
Yeah.
I know there'll be some welcome changes because there's some unfortunate RV owners that do stretch the limits of the way the bylaw reads now, for sure. Counselor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just a thought, just going back to the sidewalks. So hiking this weekend, it made me just think about, when you're going uphill versus down here, you got to yield to the other, right? So as you're going up, you get yielded to by those coming down. So I was just wondering if that's something that could be considered. I don't know if that's practical, but could be considered for sidewalks, is that pedestrians will get yielded to. So anybody that's on a bike, on a scooter, on a whatever, some sort of device would have to yield to a pedestrian on a sidewalk.
Counselor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I totally agree that you need to have a price in there for the towing fee or whatever. But just because our fees and penalties are less than other municipalities, is there a reason that we have to increase them? Do you think that there would be, I guess my question is, what's the result of increasing fees? Just to get more revenue, or do you think it'll produce a different behavior?
The hope is deterrence. The more value somebody puts on a dollar figure usually could deter somebody from doing it. That really is what even the Traffic Safety Act, it comes down to deterrence. Is it worth it? We're never going to stop everybody, but it's the few that would be deterred by the fines. Yeah.
All right, any other questions for the traffic bylaw review? Moving forward, Director Pichet, then we'll have final version coming up later on this year.
Yeah, it's actually planned. We're hoping to take some of this for consultation to various open, like the Active Living Fair, maybe a farmer's market or two in the fall here, and just try to get some public consultation with that, and then we'll bring first reading back, hopefully maybe the end of September.
Should be able to garner lots of support for higher fines there.
Sure, we will.
I think that concludes this portion. We do have an in-camera item, but I'll just go over the meetings. Regular council meetings on Monday, August the 28th and Monday, September 3rd at 5:30 p.m. here. And then we have tentatively set for a committee of the whole meeting on September 18th here at 5:30. Were we waiting on a particular speaker or just something for council to consider? Why is that one tentative? Because if there's not something specific that we need to be going through, then we can do away with it. And then on Monday, September 25th is another regular council meeting at 5:30 p.m. here. Chief Cuddy?
The September 18th meeting is actually to bring some additional options back to council for the 50th Street pedestrian access out to the Midway Center area. We've got some extra information, or we'll have some information by then to bring back for council's information.
You're hoping to have some? Is that why it's tentative here, or?
I believe the reason it is tentative is that it is not set yet, but we can't set it at tonight's meeting, but we're going to be recommending it at the August 28th meeting.
Very good.
And so we're hoping that you see the wisdom in it. And
fair enough. Thank you. Very good. So unless we've overlooked something on this agenda, I think that we've covered everything, but we do have an in-camera item. Councillor Connick.
Motion moving camera.
Thank you very much. And that is on your machines. Please go ahead and vote. And for the record, it is 7:14. And we will now move in camera as that is unanimously in favor.